Hello? Yes, works. Great. So, welcome everyone. We're going to have a first session here of the day. And before we start, I'd like to ask everyone to join us. Come to the front, because otherwise this doesn't work. I hate these alone panels, so please join us to the front. I know it's difficult, it's in the morning, you just had breakfast, but I really need your energy in the front, everyone. And I'd like to invite, for the panel, I have 4 friends, Chris from Nesta, Krisztina from Europa Media, Danielius from Startup Division, and Paul from Opticsvalley. Everyone, everyone, everyone. Here. I mean, we're all here, so just join us to the front. It's going to be great. You're going to see. Just trust. If you guys want to join us to this side, we're all here. So this panel is about the advancement of Startup Europe to build a scale-up continent. Now, to be blunt, and going directly to the bone, maybe I'm going to start with Chris. He likes to be the first. Do you believe we're already, so the European Commission has been pushing from the startup to the scale-up. Now, do you believe that the continent, Europe as a whole, is already at that point where you have, across the board, scale-ups happening across all the different countries? Or are we still, West is more on that and East is still on the startup phase?
So that's a nice softball question to start with. I think the answer is very clearly no. So Helen mentioned a program, the Digital City Index. She mentioned that a little bit earlier in terms of trying to identify the development of different ecosystems. That was actually a project which we ran at Nesta. I think our feeling is that there is still a great disparity across Europe, across different cities, in terms of the richness of ecosystems. And in terms of the ability of startups to form and to scale. I think it's probably fair to say that our feeling is that the sort of further north and further west you get, in very, very broad terms, the sort of northwest Europe, I think, is rather better, rather more developed in terms of the ability to scale. Part of this is things like access to capital. It's kind of, it's no secret that there are rather deeper pockets of capital in some of those countries.
Okay, so before we continue, this is a debate, and we need it to learn, it's to exchange, and it's to participate. So if anyone wants to jump in and ask a question, there's a mic there. So please join us on the discussion. If you have even particular questions or you want to put a topic on the panel, please join, okay? So maybe Krisztina. And by the way, everyone can, if you don't agree, it's fine. It's to be lively debate, okay? Over the years we had, I don't know how many European projects, but a lot. And there's a strong sense that after the project is finished, there's no more budget, and how do you continue this project? Is there a way for companies and nonprofits and organizations here and outside to really put that project, because there was a lot of effort already put in the project. How do you continue the project? Is it by adding a second European project? Is it by going private? Is there other ways? How do you see this?
So thank you for this question. I think it's very relevant for all of us. And I think it's also a very good question for those who would like to submit a proposal and be part of this Startup Europe journey with us. I mean, we will always forced to think about the future. So it's we should always consider our project as a seed money for creating something larger and bigger. So obviously there is a solution, so you can go for the next proposal, you can look for other funding, but I don't think it makes the whole thing sustainable. So all the things that we are developing within the project has a very strong business focus. So if we are developing a model for the universities or if we are helping the startups, indeed it should have a continuation after the end of the project. So for example, most of the models that we are developing in order to help the startups, because my project is focusing Central Eastern Europe and the Western Balkan, we are trying to build a business plan next to it. And those partners who are actually benefiting from this and representing the ecosystem should take it forward, so it will be one of their services in the daily basis. So this is what we are trying to do. So the primary focus is not to have another project. The primary focus is to commercialize all of our activities that we are doing. And also back to the previous question, I think what will remain after the end of the project is if we help startups, because in the CE and the Western Balkans we talk about startups, not necessarily scale-ups, but indeed if we can help these startups to scale, this is indeed one of our exploitation success. But definitely having a strong business focus on all of the activities you will be doing will help you to leave these projects much more after the end of the implementation.
By the way, anyone from the European Commission here besides Bogdan? Yeah, I was going to make him join the conversation, but now it's going to be difficult. Okay. Maybe
I can challenge that thinking, but maybe among us we could find at least a few examples where a project actually has finished with a working business model. Because, you know, wishful thinking that projects will establish those business models is very nice and correct. But personally, I fail to know those projects that actually had some exploitation after the project finished.
Oh, I can tell you one example.
Yeah. So let's do that.
Very nice question. Yeah. I was also coordinating a previous project in a previous way, which is about student entrepreneurship. And we built a model how universities, student organizations, and accelerators can work together. And actually, that was a model that we handed over to the student organizations. And some of those students who were at the student organizations at that time approached the accelerators. And currently in Hungary, there are 2 acceleration program runs based on the model that we developed in that particular project. So luckily, I have one.
Sorry, I'm going to challenge that because, I mean, Chris, you've been working on a lot of these reports that show a lot of the case studies, the strong case studies in Europe, and this would be actually very interesting to find out who are the projects that really become something on a private level. Is there something that maybe you're working on this? Do you think it would be valuable, or is it so tiny that just doesn't fill 10 pages of a report?
In terms particularly of sustainability after the Commission. So, I mean, it's clear that everything that the Commission funds, it wants there to be some life afterwards, right? And I think there are a couple of ways in which this does exist. So one is about networks, right? So one of the most important things for building a really rich ecosystem is network density. And you'll see that the sort of projects that the Commission is funding is very much about connecting cities and hoping that those networks persist beyond the end of the project. And I think there's good evidence that they do. I mean, certainly I talk to loads of people that I've met from previous projects. I'm sure that you guys do. Those networks help in a lot of different ways in sharing good practice and even helping startups pass between countries. Those networks, I think, do persist. I think there's a second way in which European projects can help the ecosystem overall, and that's in about sort of establishing the feasibility of a particular issue or way of working, and then hoping that the private sector will move in afterwards. So to give you an example, something that Nesta has been involved in for a few years has been a program called the Startup Europe Partnership, which is all about trying to connect corporates and startups. We think this is really important. It's a very important route to scale for startups, and it's an important mechanism of getting innovation into big companies. Now, when we started doing this, before the Commission funded this, to be honest, no one was looking at this. I mean, if you go back 4 or 5 years ago, it was happening on the fringes, but it wasn't really established in the way it is today. And I think we're in a very different place now, 5 years on. This has become a very, very well-established mode of innovating from large companies. I think the Commission work has genuinely helped move that area forward, has helped people understand the benefits of it, And what you see now is a lot of corporates have taken this on, they're doing this by themselves, and you've also seen a lot of private consultancies also springing up, trying to do this themselves. So I think, genuinely that's an area where the Commission helped kickstart some understanding.
Any corporates in the room? No? One. Are you working with startups?
We're kind of a startup that's
Okay.
kind of grown, so...
That's not the same. Okay, then I ask, how many people here have European projects? How many have continued the project after the budget ran out at the European level? 2, 3, okay. Answer the question.
Maybe I can comment just a bit for you. So I think that public good that you create during the project, because the project actually creates public good to startup ecosystems, in many cases remains after the project has finished. Either you kickstart some initiative, or maybe some organizations pick your model up and continue doing it. But I think what projects fail to do is to actually establish a revenue source to sustain themselves in the same structure as it exists. But I do not challenge that public good is not created or is not continued. I think exactly most of the organizations continue in one way or another the same initiatives, but not necessarily earning income from that.
Okay, so I have a question for Paul. How do you, knowing that, how do you make there's so many projects, and there's most of the times we're reinventing the wheel, going through the same trouble that other projects had. How do you exchange value of knowledge between the projects, between the different countries, between the different regions?
I think it requires a strong coordination, and that is the role of Startup Europe. They have been very active in the area. However, one of the difficulties is that you will have a large amount of people together, and it's becoming very difficult to coordinate. So I believe that's one of the main challenges. But to get back to what was said previously, exploiting the project results requires a different mindset. And I'm not sure, maybe in the case of Startup Division, the mindset is there. It requires going beyond the impacts, the indicators that are established in the scope of the project, and the resources allocated to that, and asking ourselves, how can we go beyond? Seeing the project as a sandbox, as a set of tools that are being developed by leveraging not our strengths only, but the ones of our partners, and the way to take that further, basically, develop new services. We are working with startups, so one of the outcomes should be to generate success stories within the scope of these projects. And once you have those success stories, I think you can exploit them to create business models. I've personally looked very closely at NUMA, for example. It's one accelerator in the Paris area. Yeah, and I think they have achieved some success stories and exploited them to create an interesting business model without being sustained by European projects.
Okay, cool. Maybe being more proactive, because you guys are sleeping and you're not participating. Give us like one or two aspects on the positive side and negative side that you feel European projects have right now, and how can we're in this interesting phase. The Horizon 2020 is finishing, the new program, the framework Horizon Europe is starting. It's the moment to do quite a few changes, and there's a moment of reflection here. What would be the things that you would change for 2020 or 2021? I don't know which date is the start.
Well, maybe just, it's a pity that we don't have commission colleagues here, or at least one. So I'm dealing with the EU projects for many years, and in order to have a great progress with Startup Europe and the involvement of companies and startups into this project is just to change a little bit the application system, because I know that most of you are afraid that, oh my God, it's a huge work, oh my God, how I'm going to do reporting. And indeed, this is something where the European Commission can step in, because the current proposal structure is really referring to large research activities rather than hands-on startup-related activities, what we were trying to implement. So I think it could be a significant change in the future. And also, I really would appreciate some cascade funding opportunities to our next activities, because indeed, I was facing many times in my project that it would have been handy to have some opportunity to do some sub-granting for our startups who really need some support.
And the good things?
Good Things is a network. And also, in my project, I have partners who never seen EU project before, but they already see the added value from business perspective. I think this is one of the greatest achievement and the positive thing.
So ICT 2018 is a good thing?
Yes, definitely.
So for me, sorry, did you
Hello, here is Samuel Frick from FHNW in Switzerland. I'm also running several Horizon 2020 projects and wanted actually to answer your question from our perspective. We're right now in the middle of such an experience of trying to generate 2 spin-offs out of one such Horizon 2020 project. And I have to say it is super difficult. The biggest difficulty is not that we would fear amount of work that is associated with it. We are expecting that, and we are experiencing that already during the project. However, the difficulty are the regulations. So we are actually fighting against the regulations for our projects, both Swiss regulations as well as European regulations, which are incompatible with each other. Since we're running still under the 2016 regime, where Switzerland was not a full partner in the Horizon program, and we struggle in convincing the authorities as well as management of our member organizations of taking the step of generating this spin-off. So they're afraid of non-compliance and even bad press about it, because there are researchers that potentially exploit the public money, perhaps even in a personal way. I think if we can find a way of proactively changing the regulations or rules for Horizon projects to enable the creation of spin-offs, that would make it super easy, and I'm convinced that much more actually would get out.
Thanks. Thank you. Chris?
So I was going to say, I agree with the point about making it easier to apply. I mean, I think it has got a lot better, right? So if you think back to previous frameworks, it undoubtedly is easier, but the hurdle, the barrier is still too high for many. I think possibly more important is about increasing the diversity of organizations who are applying. So there are, and I think some of us are in this room have seen many of the same faces year after year. There clearly are some organizations who get very good at applying for EU grants.
Is this a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, it's not a wholly good thing. It's not a wholly good thing. I think we need to constantly make sure that we are getting in new ideas and encouraging people with those ideas to come forward. If people are put off from applying because they're not aware of what's going on, or they don't know how to apply, that is clearly a bad thing. So encouraging, I mean, from Nesta's point of view, we're all about encouraging innovation, and we are, we're constantly pushing things like challenge prizes, because we believe that getting more innovators into the system is good for the system overall, right? So just increasing the diversity of ideas through getting more actors in has to be a good thing in my mind.
Danielius?
Yeah, so I think if it would be possible, because we can provide many suggestions, but whether the European Commission can actually adopt those suggestions, it's unlikely, I think. Things change slowly.
You have to trust the force, right?
I would favor a model where I would pitch a program to European Commission, and then they would say, okay, we want to fund that. So the funding of startup programs could be like funding startups. That model I would like much more. And I think even during the implementation of projects, there is a need for flexibility. You know, regardless of what you wrote a few years ago, you know, you should have the freedom to be lean and nimble and adapt to the market conditions. If you see that your project does not work out, it does not generate result, you know, you should do a pivot.
Is this, you touched on a point, time. Typically it takes like 1 year from the moment that you had the idea to the moment that you start. Is this too long? Is the market or the ecosystem just going faster and faster and European Commission needs to adapt? Is it possible for the European Commission to do this from a year to 3 months?
Not necessarily. They are trying to do it, I believe. They introduce new topics. They are trying to adapt to technology evolution, to market changes, but that's not really easy to do. However, going back to your question, and I think this will also answer your question, one of the changes that would help, I think, is focusing also on puzzle-like projects. From the beginning, encouraging the collaboration between these projects and sort of a joint action plans. I know that won't be necessarily easy, but yeah. Even though it's interesting to have a lot of innovators in the ecosystem, to have a large amount of ideas, it's also better to focus on the ones who have results and who have proved their results.
Okay, then I want to challenge that. Yeah.
Please.
Sorry, there was a question there.
But I don't want to answer these questions. I just
Okay.
wanted to, because it's...
It's a comment, it's a question?
It's a comment.
Okay.
You were, before also from Nesta, you were talking about a scale-up continent, that Europe is becoming the next scale-up continent, but it's still at the beginning. I wanted to notice something. I'm a partner in the Deep Tech for Good project at the moment. So we work with deep tech startups. And we had an issue because they told us, yeah, we want actually you to address mainly scale up. What does it mean, scale up? The problem is that deep technologies are still very new, very at the beginning of their development. And okay, I'm from Germany, so I have more scale up than in other countries. But we realize in the other partner countries, they don't have this ecosystem of deep tech scale up. And I just wanted to...
So how do you manage that? Do you drop some partners that don't have the scale-ups, or do you find new ones?
No, we never close the door. What we did is that, okay, what is exactly scale-up? You can have a scale-up process at different stages of the business life cycle. For the startups who are just before the market entry, it's also a scale-up when they get into the market. Or for the ones who are already on the market and they would like to strengthen their position on the market. So we are addressing actually startup and scale-up at a different level of their business life cycle, and it's also scale-up. So I just wanted to enhance this point and to tell to the Commission for the next call, ICT23, that they want us to focus on deep tech, but it will be really difficult to find real scale-up as they define it, meaning that they have generated their first €1 million already.
Okay, Chris, maybe I have a question for you. Taking that into account and knowing that the Commission is pushing more the scale-ups, and you're talking about the corporate startup collaboration, do you think it will be a combination of these things? Or if in 3 years' time we see that actually corporate startup collaboration is moving way bigger than anything else, because just the corporate is a client of the technology that the startup is doing, will the Commission, do you think the Commission will reevaluate the way they are thinking the push, just like they did at the Horizon 2020? The middle, they said, now it's not startups, it's scale-ups.
So I think there are several different questions, several different things going on here. So the fundamental point that we want to get startups to scale, I think is right. You know, it is all very well creating lots of small startups, but if they never achieve scale, they're not achieving impact, not really creating growth and prosperity. So that ultimate ambition, I think, is the right place to be focused on. But going back to your very, very first question at this session, it's very clear that the ability of ecosystems to support companies to scale is very, very different, right? So in the UK, the conversations turn very much to scaling because actually we're quite good at starting companies. I mean, if you look at the sort of total entrepreneurial activity rates, the startup formation rates, they're pretty high, they're pretty good, but the companies are sort of tailing off fairly quickly. So politically, there's been a sort of shift in the agenda towards the kind of later stage support. But the rest of Europe is not necessarily in the same place. And it goes without saying that you need companies to start before they can scale, right? So it is not quite as simple as focusing on either starting or scaling. It's about where do you put the emphasis in the policy mix, I think.
If you're talking about deep tech, I think you have to be aware of the dichotomy between the technologies and the market, the gap. Okay, we are talking about technologies issued from research labs, and industry already has large investments in current technologies. So they have to quantify precisely the ROI. Before throwing away what they have and investing in new technology, they have to know what are the gains. So they are going through proof of concepts, and it takes a lot of time, at least in France, it takes like 2 to 5 years for a startup to sell its technology. Okay. They are going from prototype to prototype, and basically, yeah, they're trying to survive. And despite very innovating and disruptive technologies, the market is not necessarily aligned and ready to invest. Sometimes they're going through innovation and R&D projects. But one of the very relevant questions, one of the startups I was trying to push to one of these European funded projects is that they're working on LiDAR technologies. And they said, okay, basically I will have 3 years and like 600,000 euros to develop a new technology. And you have in the US Quanergy, who just raised $130 million. What can I do with respect to that? Should I continue doing my research, even though today my technology is very good, it might answer some precise use cases? What can I do with respect to that?
I don't think you should quit just because another company raised a lot of money. Otherwise, Uber would be winning everything, or Facebook, or Google, or there's space for everyone. I think it's important, if you believe you have a product that has a market and has a client for it, then you should try. If you fail, at least you tried. But you should try. So that's market.
Sorry, I'm conscious I didn't answer the second part of your question as well, particularly around corporate startup collaboration. So I think this is absolutely here to stay. I don't see this going away anytime soon. But I think we do have to figure out how we get European corporates to be more acquisitive. So if you look at acquisitions by US corporates, they are vastly more acquisitions than European corporates make. So we need to, part of the scaling story is working out what the trajectories are, what are the paths to scale. Corporate collaboration is definitely one important route. So we need to kind of work on our European corporates, get them used to this idea, explain the benefits, get them to work more with startups. But that's not the whole picture. I mean, part of this is clearly about deepening the pools, the pockets of capital in Europe.
Do you think there's a need of a change of mindset, a change of culture?
Yes, so that was the other thing I was going to say, is that I think in Europe we still have a little bit of a tendency to be satisfied with less, right? You sort of make your £1 million startup and go, yes, I've made it.
You're talking about UK or Europe?
I think Europe as a whole, right? There are measurable differences in things like risk appetite across Europe. Study after study confirms that. And that we I think, tend to satisfy ourselves with a little bit less than maybe in America. So in America, you made your million, go, fine, okay, now how to make my billion? So just maybe raising the ambition level across Europe a bit.
So Krisztina, we were talking about this change of mindset, and next year there's going to be a lot of push for education in the calls from the Commission. Do you think this is going to be useful also to change this mindset through these calls?
Well, definitely we've seen already many good examples that these projects are helping to bring together the different stakeholders. which are in the position to generate this change in the mindset. So they can help universities can cooperate with accelerators, with mentors, with venture capitalists. So these new forms of collaboration will start the mind change. And indeed, the European projects can be an accelerator to this procedure. And I can also speak on behalf of the regions that I'm representing, the Central Eastern Europe and Western Balkan, for example. Still, entrepreneurship education and changing mindset is still a core. So it's the very first step. So without having these basics, it's almost impossible to implement those high-level activities that my fellow coordinators are doing in much more developed ecosystems. So definitely. I mean, I would also appreciate having more calls focusing on that and keeping in mind that there still is a huge difference between Western Europe, Central Eastern Europe, and the Western Balkan. So we need some more support in that regions in order to be in the same level at some point. So I'm not sure, is there anyone in the audience from the Western Balkans? Anyone? Eastern Europe?
Yes.
Okay, so what do you think about your chances being part of the Startup Europe activities?
Join us to the front.
How do you see
Come to the front.
your role in that? I'm really
I'll
curious.
actually answer with the question that I had, actually. You were talking about the timing, and you mentioned it takes about a year. I'll give you the example. Now I'm with a very successful startup, but not EU funded. But before I had a company which we sold into this startup. We applied for one EU fund, saying, okay, let's try, kind of almost going to the slaughterhouse. That was the feeling, okay, we'll go, let's try, let's see what happens. 2.5 years later, we were approved in principle that the documentation was fine. We never actually got the funding. We eventually canceled it because obviously the technology was no longer new or innovative. This is dealing with Romanian authorities on EU funding for innovation. Like, how can you as a commission, because you are granting these funds, really enforce timing? Because if you're talking innovation and you're saying
We have the
3 years
commission
from
here.
now you might have an okay.
We're going to push the commission to the conversation. Do you want to join us? Just one question.
Yes, Helen.
Super simple. We're talking about time and how the commission can decrease the time so that companies or the companies applying for EU projects can actually start working on the projects earlier. So is it possible from idea to starting the project from 1 year passing to 3 months? Or is the commission working on this time matter?
Are you talking about time to grant or time?
From idea
Yes,
to actually starting a project takes normally 1 year.
yes.
Is it possible to decrease that time?
I mean, we have already decreased it in the SME instrument. I don't know if you have mentioned this, but because that is one of the things we have done to address this time to grab from idea to actually being able to start a project. So
How many people here
I
in
know.
SME instrument? Okay. How
Okay.
many people outside of SME instrument with European projects?
yeah, it's a bit more. So SME instrument should be like 6 months, something like this from actually proposal to the grant. There's now an element of face-to-face as well. Include that will make it even more tangible who is behind the project, which is a nice feature of the SME instrument. But the grant time is about 9 months, and it's true. This is a bit problematic if you have an idea that is ready to mature.
We were actually talking about this last night, that we actually, I mean, maybe this will sound familiar, but you do the proposal and then 9 months later, or 6 months later, you get an email saying, we won. And then you're like, oh, what was the project? And wait, I'm gonna check out all the tasks, and what was the budget? Oh my God, I put this budget with all these tasks. Whoa, we gotta talk again with the partners and the coordinator. And because it passes so much time that you just forget about it. So I think the time issue is really relevant here. You have a question? Sorry.
Hi, Panis from Disrupt Cyprus and Disrupt Europe. I'm a media. Disrupt Cyprus, Disrupt Europe is the #1 tech blog in Cyprus, startup blog. Don't worry, in Cyprus we have more. For example, startups applied for grants in the government. They took them 3 years to approve them. So there is more worse things out there than 1 year.
What's the question?
The question is, first is for the Startup Europe partnership, Nesta, if you can give some actual numbers, how you impact this scale up. And the other thing, according to my experience, at least from Cyprus, Greece, and other countries, have seen that researchers, they cannot start startups. Unfortunately, researchers, they're in the mindset that at least 8 out of 10 of research people that they create amazing technologies. They cannot start working on a fast-paced way that a startup needs to scale up and set up. And here is something that the European Commission should consider, creating maybe, there is a model out there, there is the Israeli model out there, that they're selling technology. You have a successful model there, then why don't take it, take all the deep tech technology out of Europe, connect with VCs in USA or Asia, etc., and sell this technology to
Any Israelis in the room?
No.
No.
Because they're not.
Okay, otherwise, we would. Oh, one? No? Well, that's. There's a lot of them here, probably. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Actually, a lot of Israelis now, they use hubs in Europe just to create.
Chris, do you want to answer this?
Well,
Yeah.
on the particular point about the Startup Europe partnership, so it's absolutely the right question to be asking. I think it's very difficult for us to attribute the impact solely to SEP. So, we know that there are, I don't know, a dozen or so deals that have been done from people who've kind of met. We know that of the startups that have been at the matching events, they've, after those events, raised of the order of sort of 400 million. But actually ascribing all of that value to the meetings that happen there, I think is very difficult to do. I think it would be, I don't feel we can justify claiming all of that value creation, to be completely honest. But over the process, we have screened, I don't know, the order of about 2,000 startups, because part of what we're doing is sort of qualified matchmaking between corporates and startups. So we will screen a large number and then try to find ones where there's a good fit in at least a couple of areas.
So I think I don't know how much time we have, but maybe it's past already. 2 minutes. Do you want to?
Yeah, I wanted to add to SME instrument because we are actually consultants and the lead time is indeed very short, but most startups don't even know about this instrument too well. So, and we're now in the phase that phase 1 is getting killed more or less, but we don't know if it's true or not. So we are very unsure because we ourselves finance from this phase 1, but we don't know how can we talk to our customers and consult them because we're the best ones out in Austria currently. So, but we don't know if the phase 1 is continuing or not, and we are more or less financing out of this. And without this phase 1, it's hard for the startups to be able to have some expert to help them.
What's the question?
For the EU, like H2020 grants, especially the SME instrument. And because the lead time is very short, and but most startups don't know how it's written or it's done. And yeah, I don't know, like we feel very unsure about how it's going on in the future because there's some articles going around.
Then I have something. Do you want to?
Yeah, so I'd like to shift a bit the focus.
We only have 1 minute.
Yeah, to what Krisztina said, and actually challenge the thinking of the Commission in terms of this call, what it is asking. We have publicly heard that Europe should be the B2B corporate startup continent. I'd like to challenge that because there are no corporates in my country. So what should we do? And also, we don't really have many scale-ups, and we don't have deep tech. So this call is kind of we are not exactly hitting the requirements here, unless we challenge our thinking into what is a scale-up and what is deep tech. And then we end up with ICT startups that are doing blockchain projects, and then it qualifies. Cool. But in general, Europe is not homogeneous, and we should have this flexibility for projects addressing the needs of smaller ecosystems or less developed ecosystems, and innovate. And we still need to create more startups. We won't have more scale-ups because there is no startups.
Okay, so we're getting close to Christmas. So, and we have the commission in the room. So I'm going to ask you 15 seconds of one gift you would like for 2019 from the commission. Could be large or small. 15 seconds, one gift. Each one.
Yeah.
You can pass the mic. You can pass the mic. Ladies first.
So I would really appreciate some cascade funding in our next project, and the differences between the different regions. So combining to what Daniel said, because Central and Eastern Europe, Western Balkans maybe not yet there, which the call is asking right now, but we will be working on that.
Okay.
Some support with the public institutions. You are asking public procurement for deep tech. So there is a huge gap.
Danielius?
I'd wish Startup Europe would provide concrete guidance to local governments on how to support startups, because they have no clue most of the time.
Chris?
That the Commission actually gets out and visits more people.
Yes. Yes. You have already 4 countries, 5 countries you need to visit. Thank you so much. It was great. And good luck for the rest of the day.
Thank you very much, everyone. Such an exciting panel, so many dialogues. I believe someone wants to take my place. Chris, maybe you want to become the moderator? If you believe that commission is not useful, not good. Yeah, like exciting.